Right, thank you very much, Adrian, for setting this up, and welcome everybody. Just before we start, Paul has mentioned to me he'd be interested in becoming a formal member of this committee, so I certainly support that, and I'm not sure the exact procedure to do that. I imagine it would have to be done through the council meeting or something.
Look into that. Yep, certainly.
Okay, any apologies? Any? Everybody's here except for Nicole at the moment. Just wait and see if he is here and he's meant to be here or not. Oh, there he is. So we have no apologies. Any declarations of interest? One of those public forums. There's nothing that I'm aware of. Confirmation of minutes of the 21st of June. There goes Jeremy, thank you. A seconder. Lyndall, thank you. Any discussion? I've been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. That's carried. Any extraordinary or urgent business? Were of any of those? Any questions? Haven't been forwarded any. There were some questions relating to the performance of the council. We talked about those a lot this morning at our council meeting. So while you're welcome to ask any further questions, it seems to me that a number of those have been answered and discussed. I don't have any councillor's report or chairman's report for this meeting. So we'll go straight on to the business services report. Item 1 is the draft financial report on page 10. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you, Chair.
We'd like to highlight some of the important points in this. Thank you. I know we've been a public press release about the state of our finances at the moment, so that was very good and appropriate. So, thank you.
Thank you. It's not my intention to go through the document in detail. I'll take it as read to an extent, Chair, but I'd just like to point out to the council with a couple of items. Page 12. Just want to highlight operating surplus, a line in the middle of the page. Actual deficit of 2.9 million against a budget of 7.7 million. The favourable variance of 4.7 million. That was very similar to indicated to council $4.5 million variance at that time. Happy with that the forecast has come in, the actuals have come in close to the forecast that we used to create that ending plan budget at that time that we agreed to the rate increase. However, what did increase post March were the income from investments, both the dividends from, it's written down here as income from investments realised, which means dividend and interest from the portfolio, continue to increase with interest rates, 750,000 better than expected. And the income from the investments unrealised, that is the movement in the market value of the portfolio, 1.46 million higher than expected and certainly higher than we anticipated. Considering last year we had a 2.8 million change in the other direction, it's very hard to forecast which way the markets are going to move. And we've taken a prudent approach to say that we weren't expecting to gain any money or lose any value in that market. As it turned out, this year, it's a positive movement. We know from the variations in the market month to month that could quickly disappear. As I've noted in the summary, when we add the operating variance, or the positive variance in operating to the movement in investment income, and then to the movement in government funded projects, we have an overall net change of 4.7 million. The government funded projects are showing 2.3 million less than budgeted for income. It's simply a matter of timing of the projects. You'll see throughout the report that we had 64%, 65% completion versus budget. So that is why we're under there in income. A significant amount of our reported surplus here, Chair, is actually non-cash income. So that's the income from the portfolios that we're talking about. And it's the revenue showing there from the government funded projects as income that can only be used to spend on those low resilience projects. It's our intention, we formalised when we adopt the annual report, that we will transfer funds into reserves and that we will start the rebuilding of that marine reserve. And as indicated at previous committees, we'd like to, as staff, suggest that we reserve some funds for the digital transformation project as well, which was planned, budgeted for this year, but is now scheduled for a later time. Before I move on, is there any questions, Chair, from that page?
Oh, just a comment. It's actually good to see where we ended up with the portfolios bounce back, but we wisely don't actually record unrealised gains. But in a very volatile market, it's actually encouraging that that is actually improving. So, no, good result, and it's probably the first time we've been this close. 3 months without projections have been pretty close with it. Out some of those things we couldn't possibly calculate. So well done.
Thank you, Michael. Jeremy.
Yeah, and Tony's probably know where I'm going to go with. So I've already had a wee discussion in regards to that. We and obviously the community at the moment are going to go through a bit of a tough economics with inflation and things, and we need to probably explain very clearly. I know you have explained it, but people don't always look at the detail of why we have surpluses. But there is also an indication that, you know, maybe we seem to keep on having a bit of a rollover each year too. And we need to make sure that we're actually being able to, we're rating, are we actually getting the work done that we're rating for? So I think the community needs to know whether that's been done, or is this money just carrying on rolling over? And of course, they'd be saying what's better in our pockets and your pockets. It's good to see the investments coming back. You know, we'd love to be able to somehow capitalise on that and make things a bit easier. And when we are talking about the rating things into the future, but we've already said the rate. So we just need to be the information really clear, and people can easily understand why it looks like we've got $8 million or thereabouts, but it's actually accounted for, and then we need to make sure we get the work actually done. So as we've told
The challenge with accounting is that there's a significant amount of non-cash income accounted for, and as somebody once told me, councils run on cash. Perhaps I could move on to the balance sheet and other reports, Chair. So page 13 is our statement of financial positions at the end of the year. For those that are interested and ask, the employee entitlements at 1.9 million is still relative to the total payroll. So as a percentage of payroll, it is increasing, but the payroll is increasing. And we've discussed in previous meetings, the annual leave average per person is the same. We have more people relative to last year, particularly. The main movement in the balance sheet from year to year is property, plant and equipment, which is the movement or investment in our climate resilience projects. Other significant changes part of the managed funds, which has gone up by $2 million. Statement, page 14, statement of cash flows. That's what it says, simply explains the movement between years. A slight reduction in the end of year balance of 1.5 million. Still very positive, the end of the year in funds. We used to end the year in somewhat affected 5 or 6 million in deficit in the past, so happy to see that. Page 16 is our forecast cash flow for the next 12 months. Again, a similar pattern that you'll have seen in the past. In this season here, in this winter period through to October, we're using funds from our local bank facility that has been in place for some time. And we are using our own funds through the summer as we progress this climate resilience build. And as we've talked about before, when we come out of the end of summer, we'll be then looking to use long-term funds to pay for those projects. Page 17 is our list of significant expenditure. We list the government funded projects at the top, and you can see that sitting at 64-66%. Biodiversity projects tracking well. Questions before I move on to the debtors report?
Anybody got any? I was going to ask about the graph on page 16 there. The point in June 24 predicted to be a bit lower than October 23. We don't go back to June 23, that's a couple of months ago. We were above the red line, and then in June 24, we're going to be well below the red line. Is that a worry?
It's just reflecting the expenditure on the pump station and the flood bank work that we're doing each year, and that we're not taking on board any. We're tending to fund that gap at that point with the funding LGFA, so it'll become our permanent debt. I would suggest so this is a forecast. So from March, April, when we start to need funds, it'll be the time to start to draw down for that permanent funding for the projects.
Everybody else? Jeremy?
So from that point, will we be back up to what?
Well, we'll manage.
Will we decide how much at that stage? That'll be a decision back then.
I'm suggesting, councillor, that we'll have probably a longer term tranche and a shorter term. If we want to use our positive cash flow, we'll manage it appropriately. And that will depend on the borrowing rate and the investment rate.
Anything else? Anybody got anything? Your money, not sure it's been looked after properly, I'm sure it has been.
Debtors report. It's always good to project your reports depending on the feedback. So I'll take that on board and add notes. Page 18, we list out our debtors and rates due to council on the 30th of June. Continuing to, I'd like to say continuing to show improvement, definitely in the debtors. Slow improvement in the 90 days, but we are making progress with our systems there and working through that. For those who aren't familiar, we had a much higher debt and debtors in the past. Till 2 years ago, we changed our fees and charges schedule when we asked for a higher deposit for consent applications. And so many now of our consent application debtors are actually covered for their normal processing. Because in the past, we were often chasing many smaller debts for consent. So that's encouraging and is working. In the rates area, well, it shows a number like 1.5 or 1.6 million as a percentage of the total rates that we invoiced for the period for 12 months. It's sitting at 6%. We'd like to see that come down as a percentage, and we're continuing to work on that. We've had good response to those who were late and overdue, but it is a work in progress. That number represents a lot of little accounts. We have the facility, as I say, here to approach mortgages, and we do when we need to. So the remaining balance of those who have no mortgage and are relatively small amount. So it's constant work to follow up, and I look forward in the future to be able to reporting that that's come down a little bit. you might note that are now participating in rate sales. We've got to the point where we need to do that. And I think the one has actually been completed in conjunction with one. There's no change in the clean air report. In a way. And we have our activity reports. And we provide these as a summary, a graphical summary, along with the finances for each of the groups of activities. I'll go through them. Is there any questions on what I've covered in these reports?
Cleaning lines is being reviewed at the moment, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Okay, what scope is that at?
I think with Rachel, I believe there's options being put forward or proposing for alternatives.
We've had a discussion about it, I know, I just can't remember in detail.
The recommendation coming, because the climate change conversation at the last, was it Rachel? The last S&P meeting, we had the climate change.
So just to clarify the question.
Oh, just where are we at with the review of the clean air loans initiative?
So we received at the workshop the report that undertook the review, and it will come through to you as a recommendation of the strategy and policy committee.
At the next S&P meeting. Okay. Righto, good, thank you. Jeremy.
I'll just go back to the rate debtors. I mean, I'll just make a comment that it's coming along. Seem to be getting that under control, so that's good. Just in regards to the bar graphs and things, it's just looking really not achieving. And some big dark green, red lines, I should say green. The community engagement seems to be popping up occasionally. Was that correct? I'm just seen it last night when I was looking through it. But does the read mean that we're not achieving any of that on that bar?
So at the end of the year, we have to have only achieved and not achieved, whereas during the year we have on track, not on track. So it's very clear cut, unfortunately, because in many cases you can be nearly achieved but not achieved. So yes, we are sitting at 18 at a 56 for not achieved. And Rachel will stand on that when she reads her report. I'd like to point out, perhaps to those who haven't, not totally familiar with these reports yet, while there's a lot of graphs and numbers, one of the pieces of the report that actually is quite handy for councillors to look at is in the middle of each page, there's a circle, blue circle with some yellow. On the page 20, it says 95%. Now, what that means is across the council, across the budgets, 95% was spent, 5% unspent. When we look at air, that's 85, fire 97, climate 99. Coastal Marine went the other way because we had much more money than we expected. And regional leadership 97, and water and land 88. So what that might help you with is when you're looking at these things, rather than have to look at the numbers that are written there, and say, as we go through the year and at the end of the year, that's what we spend as a percentage of our total budget for that activity. And I don't know if that helps, but it's an indicator that you might not have perhaps been using in the past.
So are you saying the percentage of spend is a better indicator than the achieved and not achieved, because the not achieved, maybe 95%.
It's there to sort of look at the expenditure that was undertaken and allow that to be compared to the activity that's been achieved and or near activity, because the purpose there is to say what has been spent on this activity. And water and land is $10 million of 40 million. This is quarter of our portfolio. We spent 88%. So we underspent that area. And we've got through these. I'm not saying that's related. I'm saying it's an opportunity to ask if it's related. And that's all we're putting forward there, is that it's an opportunity we tried many years ago to say, how is our budget related to our output? And it's only at a very high level here.
Jeremy?
So just in regards, when you're looking at that land performance, you know, you got community engagement is totally already. It may be up to us. We either,
Absolutely.
like, it could be, if it was 70%, you might have hit 65%, but it becomes all red, is that right?
I encourage you to go to the,
It sounds like we completely failed there, but you actually don't know. Yeah, I know, yeah, I'm just looking, people look at these now.
yeah, unfortunately, at the end of the year, that is the outcome was either achieved or not achieved, and it's not close. And we've debated, and Rachel can explain this, we've talked about the design of the standards to allow us to say if there's improvement year on year rather than achieved or failed. Improvement year on year is what the OAG is looking for us to measure, so we can see trends. Sometimes it's hard to do a trend.
Read.
Yeah.
Yeah, climate change and community resilience, 99% being delivered, not achieved 4 out of achieve 6. More.
That's something,
Sometimes it's actually easier just to see the figures and know where we're at.
just got, if we can indicate when you want to speak would be good. And then Nicole, if you've got it.
Yes, I think it's, if somebody picks up and sees the headline regional leadership, that's all red, but it's actually pertaining to the progress on reviewing the regional policy statement. But some of those things, I suppose, are working in the structure, but it's we're almost beating ourselves up. But we've done nothing in the regional leadership space.
Yeah.
Whereas actually it's got specific. It's for a specific requirement that we are quietly working through.
Jeremy?
Is that something we can change, or is this government? I'm looking here and going, this is confusing, even though I know what I'm sort of saying. I prefer someone else to look at it and go,
It's part of our thinking about the thing, how we can change sport by design. And she is.
And through you, Chair, just to note, I guess that these performance targets were set back in 2020/2021, so they were adopted in the middle of 2021, and things clearly move on, things change over time. We have the opportunity through the upcoming long-term plan process to considerably change these, and we are reviewing them at the moment to bring through a suggested revised set to you. And I think I've alluded to before that we have gained a lot of learnings out of what's been included this time around, and are looking at how we better represent our activity and better report to you on the performance of the organisation.
we talked about this before, we were actually very hard on ourselves, either achieve, you know, like, it looks like that. And it's not really indicating what's actually going on.
If this was our child's report from school, we'll be very happy and concerned. The way it's reported.
So Rachel, did you say that that's possible to improve the way we report on this?
Holding for the next long-term plan.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Yeah, just to add to that, because I was just saying actually that school reports, you know, and the NCEA qualification is the same, you know, they've got it or you haven't. But supplementary to that, I suppose, is the fact that the commentary around each of those reports is really, really important, because that actually does some explaining rather than just looking at the cold hard red and blue. The commentary is really important.
Yeah, I'd say it's you know, it's important to note, like, this summary report in isolation would probably give a reasonably misleading view, and so that's why it's important to look at the summary report in conjunction with the fuller detail, which explains, you know, how we get to some of these reads and things. So collectively, it's good as a summary to give you a snapshot. It should be read in conjunction with the detail where you can flick through and see the particular areas where we might be falling behind and doing well. Yeah.
Yes, John.
Quick one is that we've got to work out who's reading these documents. You know, like this is for us. or if the community is looking at this and we'll make it clear, and so we'll be keeping, you know, like 2-year target all the board. So I'll look at the graph, the bar graphs. Won't look at the commentary. I'll just look at the, oh, let's read. A lot of people will do that. They won't actually do the fine print at the bottom.
In Conservation Council, we produce this in a summary report, annual report summary, not with the bar graphs, but with the longer parts or I achieved and not achieved. It might be less confronting.
Thanks, Tanya. Yes, Nicole?
Well, you're discovering the annual report. I was just going to say the commentary in there might be able to give a better message to the public, because you're not going, unless they're very studious, they're not going to look at all that bar graphs up in the Mayfair report, but that commentary could cover some of that stuff, because quite a good year in most things. If you weren't colourblind, you'd think that wasn't the case. So,
Well, I was going to say to Jeremy's comment before that if people don't read the detail, we know that councillors will have. So when they ring up and complain, you'll be able to explain it to them. Right. Any other questions on this draft financial report? I move it, Jeremy, seconder. Wendell, thank you. And all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried, and thank you again, Tanya and Rachel. Right, the next item is long-term plan progress. And this is where there's a little bit more detail in the performance. Rachel, thank you.
So as indicated, this flows on very much from the first report and is showing for the last quarter of the year how we've tracked across some of their activity. I think there's a really important point here that we've already highlighted, and that the set performance targets we have are a reflection of our work programs, and they were set, those targets in the middle, finalised in the middle of 2021. So things do evolve and change, and those targets don't reflect the entirety of what we're doing. They're a snapshot. So just to give you an example, since the long-term plan was adopted, we now obviously had to respond to quite a bit of central government regulation. And the most recent example is the amount of work that has gone into the freshwater farm plan regulation. So there's been a whole program of work within this organisation that you can't necessarily see in that particular report. So just to make that point, another point that has been made is the fact that this is the basis for our annual report, and that is in the process of being prepared at the moment. And the summary is very much the public facing aspect of this process. So that will hopefully be in a much more user-friendly format than what you can see in the detail contained in these reports. The public should be able to pick that up and see how we've tracked at a glance. I also thought it might be useful just to give you a sense of how we've tracked over the last few years in this space. So probably to go back 5 years actually, because we've had COVID amongst the last few years. Prior to the 2019-2020 year, we'd been sitting at an annual achievement rate for our performance targets in the 60% area. For 2019-2020, we dropped right down to 44%, and 2020-21 dropped to 50%. Stayed down low, but improved a little bit. Last year, we got back up to 68% achievement, and we've tracked up a wee bit further this year with that 70%. So we are on a journey of improvement, and obviously the COVID years did hit us reasonably hard. In comparison with other councils, Tanya's kindly had a look through, and they are all sitting in that 70%, not all, sorry. Otago Regional Council, Environment Canterbury and Waikato have got the information available and are sitting in that 70% bracket. So we're not too dissimilar to other councils, and we can bring some of that commentary through when we bring the annual report to you in a few weeks' time.
So just to note that at the end of the last quarter, we thought around 48 of the 63 activities would be completed as planned. That's dropped at the end of the year to 44 out of 63 activities. Some of the areas where we haven't achieved, and yes, we have often got close, but not quite, and that hard nature of the targets can make it challenging. But for example, in the climate change portfolio, you'll see that there are some targets, A, around the climate change survey, B, around the interagency climate change group, where we haven't achieved because we're almost there, but we haven't quite got the survey out to the community, or we haven't quite got the survey out to the community at the end of June. Pretty much highlighted, but similarly with the interagency group, whilst that's been up and running, we hadn't finalised the youth engagement mechanisms, so those are shown as not achieved whilst significant progress has been made. The other big one in there is obviously the climate resilience projects, and because of the timing of those shifting around, another not achieved whilst significant progress has been made. Similarly, you'll see in the coastal portfolio that there are a couple of non-achieved or not achieved, and that relates to, in some cases, the review of the regional coastal plan and the timing of that changing from what we had in 2021. If I come back to the question before about community engagement, so there are a number of performance targets that were set up around measuring the effectiveness of our engagement with our communities, and we have what we call an insights program to help us with that. The target for those in many cases was around having a baseline created this year, and we have got those identified for some spaces. You might see, for example, in the target around the harbour master activities that we have actually set that. But in other cases, we've said, well, actually, we've got a stakeholder strategy that's in development. We think it would be wrong before we've talked to our stakeholders to finalise that baseline measure. So we're going to hold off until we've had that conversation. So that's another area where you'll see a couple of not achieved. Really happy to answer any questions. Hopefully that's shed some light on the questions that you had around the report.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Chairman. I guess the most basic question I've got is timing is often an issue with the reporting. So what would be interesting is to know how much of this is a timing related issue and which items are actually of concern and, you know, not happening for other reasons, whether they be systemic or something else. Thinking about the risk cap on which ones of those have been not related to timing, but operational or systemic issues.
Anybody else, Alistair?
Sorry,
I was inviting you.
I'm being quiet all day. I've got a new leaf.
No, we want to hear from you. Jeremy.
Are you going?
Actually, I was just looking at some specific stuff around biodiversity. There's actually some really good stuff going on. Most of the ecological surveys, like it's been 88, seem to be ramping up and up. 60,000 hectares have been surveyed. I'm just looking into the details of this. It's just generally pretty good. Good information.
Thank you. Yes, no, that's right. It's good. What's this hold up with the specific hold up with the coastal plan? This was something that the commissioners for the salmon farm project commented on and thought that maybe, well, they just said it was due for a review, and I think we all know that, but
So through you, Chair, there's some explanation on page 67. So essentially we have been focused on that surface water activity plan change, and there has been, as you'll be aware, a discussion around the timing of the wider coastal plan review. A lot of focus policy and planning resource currently in the freshwater space, but also other spaces. And so, whilst there has been a coastal plan surface water, oh, it's virtual here, so that surface water activity plan change has been progressing, but the timing of the wider review has changed, and Lucy will speak to that.
Thank you, that's great. So through Chair, just in addition to Rachel's points around the surface water activity plan change, so the hearings for that have now concluded, but it took more time and more energy than we would have liked, I think it's fair to say. Not only that, but the technical work that was required in order to ensure that it was a robust position to be taking was more comprehensive than we thought. So it took a,
So I just wonder if I should declare that.
yeah, so it probably,
Yes.
I will leave it there though in regards to that point. But the wider coastal plan review has been continuing. What we have been navigating over the last wee while is how we connect our freshwater planning processes to the coastal ones, and how do we make sure from a council and iwi perspective that the values and visions that we might have for our freshwater are able to be translated through to our coastal areas as well. So intending to bring a program plan back to strategy and policy, hopefully in September, but if not September, then October. We are currently working through with our partners the details around that, and to have in there a proposed timeframe for when we're intending to get the review completed.
Right, so the new legislation that's coming through is not really going to interfere with that too much.
No, Chair, and I think what I would just note is that's been one of the added complexities, because a lot of the remaining direction we need on the coastal plan relates to elements that arguably could be spatial, and so elements where we might have opportunities for including them as a spatial strategy consideration as opposed to a coastal plan consideration. So still kind of some nuts and bolts to work through on that part, but certainly keen to come back and have kind of either a workshop or a formal item to discuss the scope and the time direction.
Okay. I've got another question on that. Anybody else got anything? The New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, it's very old now too, 2010, I think, wasn't it? Something like that. So what's the review process for that?
So elements of the NZCPS are going into the new reform elements. So the national direction that's getting bundled up in the national planning framework will include the intentions from the NZCPS. In terms of any uplift or changes that will need to be made to that, that'll come as part of the next iteration of the national planning framework, assuming that it still exists come the end of the year. If things change in that regulatory reform space, that will become a question that I would imagine takes more thinking about. There isn't, other than that, there isn't a timeline for the reviewing it. And a lot of, as we talked a little bit about before, a lot of the complexity of the NZCPS isn't actually just within it as a policy statement. It exists because of the case law that supports its implementation. And so some of the key decisions that have been made in relation to the NZCPS ensure that everybody's very clear about what the word avoid means. So that case law is really wide reaching. And so when the government might consider reviewing the NZCPS, they'll have to be live to that fact.
Right, that's King Salmon. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? It's quite a big report, and as you say, Rachel, it goes into our annual report, basically. Yeah. Is that right?
There are areas that councillors feel could do with, and we've mentioned one or two informally to staff, but if there are any other areas that could do with clarification for the annual report, please feel free to highlight those. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, and we can do that just by communicating with you.
Yes, that we.
Is that all right? Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else got any questions? All right, thank you. Move that we accept that report, Lyndall, and seconder Jeremy. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Right, have to make some-
I'm just going through here and I see big account,
Yeah, sorry.
ANZ chick account.
Yeah, it's obviously a transactional account.
Oh, on page 86, right at the top.
Right, well, we're up to item 3 now, so that's,
We're square.
what was the question, Alison?
No, it's all right, you fixed it. There's no ANZ check accounts these days. They were out, well, about 3 years ago. But Tanya will catch up.
Is that, I'm not quite with everything there, is that all right, Dave?
There's no wording change on the account. now.
Just a wording, just a
Yeah, it's just
typo.
on top of page 86.
Right, Tanya, can you just highlight any things on this item 3, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to highlight that as we've noted in the financial report, investment returns for 2023 were significantly ahead of what we expected, and a big improvement on the previous year. We've ended up with a 8.9% rolling average June to June, which is not something we could have expected earlier in the year. So a good result. As we've discussed, these funds stay in the account, inflation proofing our disaster reserves and our general reserves that is represented by those funds. In addition, we received interest of 408,000 on the interest in our check account, which was a positive result. So it was the management of our surplus in the December to March period, as a result of being able to deposit on higher rates at our local banks. The summary on page 87 suggests from JB Ware that they're happy with the strong performance. They're retaining a defensive bias, which simply says they're not looking to change our portfolio, they're being cautious. The graph on page 87 would suggest that while we've had more positive months than negative, the negatives can be equally large. So that's the volatility aspect of a balanced portfolio. So yes, we've finished the year with a good result, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on that?
So you're getting your 8.9% by taking that when we're in the positive. In other words, you would have had a borrowing of 8.9%. So you're saying that that was actually giving us an 8.9% return.
The portfolio is JB Ware invest 50% of our funds into local and international bonds with the large companies, and the other 50% into the share market. And 8.9% is where we ended at the end of the year. If you'd asked me in April, we would have been around 3%, because we're seeing a steady change in the share market internationally in the last few months. The graph on page 87 is to reflect the movement month to month of the value. It's just simply showing the huge volatility in the market that can happen when you're investing in the share market.
Yes, if they were to tell us, give us the result as of yesterday, it would probably be a lot worse.
Yeah,
Jeremy?
budget to figure is about 4.5. Is it still that high or do we lower it now?
Percentage.
Yeah.
We actually budget for realised income coming out of COVID. We were budgeting for 2% real return. And this annual plan that we've now entered, we've moved it up to nearly 3 because the overall average interest rates. We were at one point, if you might remember, earning 1%. during COVID times. So there's just such huge variation.
Anybody else? Just comment that the benchmark table is quite useful, I think. That shows that they're performing quite well in relation to other fund managers, I guess.
It is, and you can see that perhaps the only negative there is the offshore bonds. We do periodically, perhaps for this committee, we haven't done it in this last few months, as we compare the returns from our portfolio manager against the market, and each of the last 2 years we've done that. We've found ourselves out of a total providers list of 30, we've found ourselves sitting around 4 or 5. So our providers doing well. I was asked why we're not at number 1, but I think the chair was quite right in suggesting that you don't necessarily, a chair of the council was that you don't want to necessarily be at number 1. It's a risky place to be, but yes, we're happy with how the 50/50 portfolio is working at this point.
Right, thank you. Tanya, any other questions on that report? If not, would someone like to move that we note the investment report? Alistair and Lyndall, all those in favour, please say aye. That's carried. Item 4 is the Civic Financial Services Annual Report. Tanya or Don, do you want to?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I think the report is read. It's provided to council for information. We received this by virtue of the fact we're a shareholder in Civic Financial Services, albeit a very, very small one at 0.09%, which you'll see on page 125. I think in February, Civic Financial Services declared a decrease in their management fee by about 3 basis points, which, whilst will have a positive impact on council, would be relatively immaterial, as we only have a small number of staff that are in the super scheme provided by Civic Financial Services.
Someone that everybody understand what they do or they're involved in.
In previous life, we hadn't been with them, and back in Graham, always he thought it would be a good idea. They almost went double that with it. I could put in $10,000 in it. Sort of now there's more superannuation and everything else now. Yeah.
Okay, so the recommendation is to note the thank you, Nicole. Seconder. Lyndall, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thanks, carried. Thanks again, Tanya. Item 5 is the information management systems. We've got Paula and Jane.
Fine.
Yeah, it's very good timing. Everyone's a good time, so welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Would you like to just highlight any things that you think that we should be taking note of in particular?
Probably the piece I'd like to highlight around the information management is that we have rerun our internal audit across our system, across our information, and there has been an improvement, which we're quite excited about. So an improvement with regards to capability, and in particular around our governance for information management, which is quite a highlight, considering that we also actually had the letter from the Minister from Internal Affairs regarding governance with regards to information, and we are on the mark, which is really exciting. Okay.
The bits that I'd like to bring to highlight is the Bring Data to Life project has met our LTP target, which was rewarding. The groundwater portal has gone live. It has got a small audience. Just trying to get some stats on it, and I haven't quite gotten, so apologies for that. But the people that are requesting that data are loving the output, and we've had some really positive feedback come back from that. So we're in the stages now of reviewing what the next data set will be. It more likely to be suicidal or something like that, but it would be available. It saved our data team a significant amount of time and requests, so it's been really successful. The cameras, we've got now 5 live on the website, so if you pop onto our website under webcams, there's now 75. One of them being the Waihapai walkway, which is really nice up at the dam, so you know, you can check out the weather and what it's like up there. And the customer contact project is the good news on that is there's been a business case written, a job description has been drawn up, and it is in the stages of waiting for GM sign off for an additional admin person in that contact space. So we'll see some significant progress in that space, and the ICT actual task roadmap that's sort of getting towards its very final stages of being able to present that in front of the GMs and get sign off on what that looks like for our strategy. So that was my areas of pilot.
Well, thank you. Any questions? Jeremy?
Yeah, I spent a bit of time on the groundwater portal last night. I looked around all the old bores and things that are. One thing, and it was quite good, and I'm bringing out my Excel's spreadsheet.
You are able to get through.
Yeah, so I was trying to test on how where all the bad stuff is. But on those, we do have extra data, I take it, like on nitro levels on those bores and things. Is that private? There's obviously testing going on, yes, have it,
Yeah.
in regards to what the samples out of those bores are. Is that another level of sort of privacy that we don't allow?
I'm not sure of the answer.
I'm just saying, is there more data that
I'm
is
assuming that there is, and I'll get the answer.
yeah, I don't know, there might be something.
Privacy issues.
Yeah, privacy might be,
Yeah.
but it certainly works anyway, so it's good.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the data lives in another place.
Checked out the Waikato stream on the camera too, so everything looks good up there.
That's good, yeah.
Oh, beautiful, clear.
He was thinking
That's
of
what
going
I'm saying anyway.
The farm plan way that farmers can interact with us to develop these farm plans. Talked about that a lot, and we did have a presentation recently about the functionality of that being improved. So are you happy with the progress on that? And you know, when people have to do these, and not for a little while yet, but when they do them, we'll be able to they'll be able to access that and make it relatively easy for them to develop these farm plans as much as they're wanting to anyway.
Yeah, I believe that, you know, like we met that minimum viable product for that first release to meet the August deadline. I believe that there's going to be feedback come back from customers, and then with any enhancements that are required will be implemented in that roadmap for that piece of work.
Okay, so that interaction, that feedback, that's not a formal process, but it's an opportunity for people to comment on it, is that?
Yeah, we've led the technology part of that, and so I will connect up with the rest of the team and find out what that feedback loop is for that.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's good. It's pretty important. Obviously, there's been a bit of concern about farm plans, so hopefully it'll all go smoothly. That needs to.
I think, I mean, there's sort of this first stage for the bridge and collecting that data for the bridge, and then what does INFTP and that going to look like in the future. So I think there's a massive amount of work coming out of MFE on this as well.
Right.
What the future looks like for collecting this data.
Questions for Paula, Jane? Right, thank you very much. There's a lot of work there, so that we all have to we all have to get involved with, don't we? Because
Thank you. Welcome your feedback. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Right, so we'd like to move, we note the activity and progress in delivering information management systems and technology within the council. Lyndall moves and Jeremy Nichols second that. All those in favour, please say aye. That's carried. Right, item 6, the annual activity plan. This should say we're just going to have a slight change in the order of items. After this item, we're going to discuss the climate resilient projects, which is item 8, which was originally to be all and public excluded, but only part of that will be. So we'll go from this item to the first part of item 8. So the annual activity plan. Yeah. We've got a list of our meetings. When we're going to do what? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. We're waiting. Thank you. Latest update of the press. So what I'd like to advise is that the meeting is scheduled for the 13th of September will not be occurring in this meeting. The meeting is scheduled to present the draft annual report and reread the terms of reference. Draft annual report needs to go to the risk insurance meeting. You yourselves have seen in advance of that meeting, you have seen the draft results, the actual draft annual report and the auditor's report with it. Now that the meetings are separated, we'll be going to the risk insurance meeting. So there's one less meeting there.
Okay.
Apologise. This I noticed during the publication of this agenda. Just confirming that. What's written down there for the strategic asset review and SIPO will appear in the 29th of November. We'll have a regular 29th of November meeting, which will be the first September quarter. That is the only change to the agenda I'd like to note.
All right, thank you. That sounds reasonable. Any questions on that? Lyndall?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just going to ask again about the EV Charter of Understanding. Two parts to that question. Firstly, I'm not entirely sure I understand what that is. And B, it's overdue.
Thank you, Chair. So the Charter of Understanding you can find on our website, and that sets out the agreement between this council, all the councils of Murahaku, and it's not just the full councils in the Southland region, that's also Queenstown Lakes District Council, Clutha and Otago Regional Council. So it's the agreement with the relevant runanga around how we're going to operate together, and it establishes Te Ao Marama. So where that is at in terms of the review, it has been discussed through the Te Rutu Taio process, and it is currently being advanced by Te Ao Marama in terms of an engagement process with individual runanga around the priorities going forward, so that can feed into the charter. So yes, it is overdue, but it is in a process still. So I'm very happy to get a written update to you on that for the next meeting if you'd like.
Some idea of the time frame or when we might. I mean, I appreciate that that's not entirely in our hands, but it's going to slip off the end. Yeah.
Right, thank you, Lyndall. Anybody else on any questions about that, particularly on that last page, the triennial agreement and full wellbeing's report And the other one is section 17A review. Could you enlighten us on those?
All of those last ones.
Yeah, the ones that are due this year.
So actually we've got Damien in the back here who is working with Dave Gibbs, a strategy manager on the representation review. So that's due 2024. Some of the conversation at 1:30 tomorrow actually is relevant, well, connects in terms of you have a brief discussion around the electoral system tomorrow afternoon. So that one is with Damien and Dave, and I don't know if you want to touch on it in the room, but that's in the early phases in the
Yes, through you, Chair. The representation review is quite a long process with many different components. The workshop tomorrow afternoon is looking specifically at the voting systems part of that. And that is one of the earlier stages. It's really, there's a timeline which I will be sharing with you tomorrow around the wider process and how this all fits together. So you can see the different contexts of those parts and how it will involve that.
All right, thanks, Damien. We'll look forward to that. What about section 17A? What's that?
So actually, I'm just wondering whether we could use a few minutes of the workshop tomorrow, given we haven't got the whole council here to touch on that as well. So that's also on it under the Local Government Act. We have got some work underway to review with Martin Jenkins at the moment, which is developing up our operational plan, and we did think that provide quite a good foundation for the section 17A review. The other things listed there, so there's the representation review and section 17A review, which tie closely to the local government legislation. The full wellbeings report, that is something slightly separate in that it sits, it does connect to our long-term plan and the way we do our work and the full wellbeings in the Local Government Act. We've got a framework that's being developed in the science area that we're looking at how we roll it out across the organisation more broadly. Might be quite a good one to bring back to you at some stage. We've already clearly dealt with the triennial agreement that came through to you earlier in the year, and that's all done and dusted for this triennium. And I've just touched on the Charter of Understanding, which doesn't connect directly to the government legislation, but as the arrangement we have with Mana Whenua for our council and other councils down here.
Okay, so that's one is overdue. Lyndall was asking about that before.
Yes, that's right. Would you like, actually, I said with that one that I could provide a written update to the next meeting. Would you like a short written update on all of them with a bit more detail? Would that be helpful? Explaining what they are. Clearly we'll be discussing some of it tomorrow, but we could provide a bit more context for you if that's helpful for the next meeting.
Yeah, it would be for me. Are other people happy with that? We don't want to overload you with work. Not too much.
Doesn't have to be an essay, would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, short.
All right, thanks, Rachel. That'll be good. Nicola.
Yes, just on that electoral review. So the next year we actually have to look at about the discussion about the number of councillors, the boundaries, the whole 9 yards. Some of the newer councillors. That's a second term, or every 6 years we have to go through that process. So that's obviously something that's coming up in 2024. The first bit of cab off the rank of the other two councillors have already made a decision on first place place versus STP. So
Yes,
that will be coming, but yeah, that's quite a comprehensive little bit of exercise to really, to review our game and values and
Communities of interest.
communities of interest, etc. No, that's fine. Just
Right.
problems on that page, so that's good.
So we'd like to note this report, and we'd like to move.
Happy to move.
Nicole and seconder, Phil. Thank you very much. Thank you, Damien. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, carried. Right, now we move to item 8, which is on page 145. So we're still in public meeting this stage. So Right. Would you like to start this off with it for us?
Yes, I'll take
Okay.
you through Chair. I'll take you through the climate resilience projects in terms of the performance update. In relation to statutory pump station, there has been an issue discovered with the design and construction of the slab that supports the Archimedes screw pumps. It's 440 millimetres higher than the pump supply required. Environment Southland and its consultants have been working to identify the most appropriate remedial solution, which has now been identified. Environment Southland are also seeking advice on the recovery of the costs of the remedial solution from the parties involved, and are in discussions with those parties about that. In relation to, as you'd be aware, Invercargill and Wyndham projects, they've been put on hold during the winter. The main reason for that on hold is the wet weather affects material. So the plan is that those projects will recommence probably in November when the weather best suits. And you probably also realise or be aware that the Gore Stop Bank construction between, I think it's Ontario Street and Toronto Street, I think, has been able to continue reasonably unaffected by the weather, so that's good news. And I think that really concludes my kind of my climate resilience projects.
Thank you, Paul. Do we have any questions?
Can we pop over the bank and have a look there at the town?
You're talking about Matara Right Bank?
Yeah.
So not a climate resilience project, but if there was there is plans to have a councillor field trip to see the progress. I can confirm that we're about 100 metres of rock will be completed by the end of the day, so it's moving pretty quickly now.
All right, thank you, Paul.
So thanks for that update, Paul, and particularly on the Steve Street pump station. This is a strategic asset that's going to support in the form of our airport, and we want that project to be foolproof, and no doubt it will be in the long run, because it needs to meet the specifications, and well, just happy to have that update.
Yes, thank you. Yes, important to get that right. Anything else? Well, we now need to move into public excluded for the next part, because
the reason to move into public excluded business is to deal with confirmation of minutes and the discussion. Apologies. The item 7, Regional Software Holdings Limited nominations of Board of Directors, and item 8, Climate Resilience Projects. The reason for the confirmation of minutes to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations. And item 7 and item 8, reason to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantages.
would somebody like to move that we move into public excluded? Jeremy, second up.